March 15, 1943. The air is thick with tension at the Ford Motor Company plant in Detroit, Michigan. Workers bustle about, their faces etched with determination and weariness, the rhythmic clanging of machinery echoing against the steel walls. Outside, heavy clouds loom, mirroring the uncertainty of a nation gripped in war. In a dimly lit corner of the factory, a young engineer, George, pores over blueprints scattered across his desk. His brow furrows as he contemplates the daunting challenge of redesigning an effective submachine gun for the troops, one that could withstand the brutal conditions of combat. A persistent worry gnaws at him. How can we arm our soldiers without sacrificing quality for cost? The hum of machinery fades as George's thoughts turn to the battlefield. He envisions brave soldiers, outnumbered and under-equipped. Their lives depended on the very weapon he's meant to improve. The stakes are high, and time is running out. Suddenly, a flicker of inspiration strikes. He jots down notes feverishly, his heart racing. This could be the breakthrough they need, a weapon that's affordable yet effective. What he didn't know was that this idea would change the war, he whispers to himself, a mix of hope and fear coursing through him. If stories like this fascinate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and comment below. March 15th, 1943. Inside the Ford Motor Company plant, the air is heavy with the scent of oil and metal, a stark reminder of the industrial might that America has mobilized for the war effort. The hum of machinery is relentless, each clang and whir a pulse of labor intensifying in the face of an uncertain future. Outside, the skies are an ominous gray, reflecting the storm brewing not just in the weather, but across the globe. As George, a young engineer, sits hunched over blueprints, the stakes of his work weigh heavily upon him. The world had plunged into chaos. The Axis powers dominated vast territories. Germany, with its advanced military engineering, had established an iron grip over Europe. The Luftwaffe terrorized cities, while panzer divisions stormed across the continent with mechanical precision. As American forces faced these formidable adversaries, they were armed with weapons that felt outdated and inadequate. The submachine gun utilized by American troops, the Thompson, cost $200 to produce and, despite its reliability, was heavy and cumbersome. In contrast, the German MP-40, a paragon of engineering, was sleek and efficient at a staggering cost of $30. Despite its complexity, it was a masterpiece of design, lightweight, easily manufactured, but ultimately, a weapon that was out of reach for American production lines. Production delays and shortages plagued the U.S. military, which faced a dire need for a weapon that could be quickly manufactured in mass quantities. Statistical reports from military analysts painted a bleak picture. American troops were suffering unprecedented losses, and in 1942 alone, the U.S. Army reported a staggering 80,000 casualties in the European theater. The demand for effective close combat weaponry had never been more urgent. Experts across different branches of the military expressed their frustrations at the shortage of reliable submachine guns. "Nothing worked as it should," one senior officer remarked during a strategy meeting. "The enemy is advancing, and we remain stuck with obsolete technology." The consensus seemed clear. The existing designs were impractical for the mass production required to arm soldiers swiftly. As George continues to sift through designs, he finds himself haunted by one thought. What if the solution lies not in complexity, but in simplicity? His mind drifts to the assembly line innovations that had transformed the automotive industry, enabling swifter production and greater efficiency. But could such an approach be applied to weaponry? The idea seemed absurd, a desperate gamble against the backdrop of war. Military experts, however, were resolute. They consistently dismissed innovative proposals, often stating, "It couldn't be done." Bureaucratic inertia stifled creativity, and as George listened to these discussions, he felt the weight of hopelessness enveloping him. The engineers and military officials were entrenched in traditional methodologies, blinded by the sheer complexity of existing models. One notable failure came when the Army attempted to develop a new submachine gun, the M3. In its early tests, the weapon jammed repeatedly, and production costs skyrocketed due to its intricate components. By the end of 1942, the project was scrapped, further deepening the chasm between the needs of soldiers on the front lines and what was being provided. As George surveyed the bleak landscape of military technology, he was struck by a haunting realization. The war was evolving, but American ingenuity was lagging. The soldiers in Europe were fighting with outdated tools against an enemy equipped with advanced technology. The reality of combat demanded more than just hope. It required innovation. In the heart of this storm, George stood at a precipice. With every passing day, his resolve grew stronger. He became determined to break free from the chains of conventional thinking. He could not ignore the cries of soldiers echoing across the battlefield, yearning for a weapon that would empower them. Yet the specter of doubt loomed large, whispering that any radical departure from the norm could lead to his professional undoing. The clock was ticking. As the Allies prepared for more aggressive operations, they needed a solution, and they needed it fast. The pressure mounted, and George felt a growing urgency to act. He began sketching ideas, envisioning a submachine gun that was not only efficient and cost-effective, but also simple enough for mass production. The idea of utilizing stamped metal parts and fewer intricate components began to take shape in his mind, but the thought of pursuing this unconventional route filled him with trepidation. Inside the factory walls, the atmosphere grew heavier, with the realization that time was of the essence. As George looked around at his fellow workers, their determination fueled his own. Each one of them was dedicated to the cause, the fight for freedom and the hope for a better tomorrow. The weight of their sacrifices ignited a fire within him. What if I could create something that could save their lives? Yet, the looming specter of authority remained a formidable barrier. Military brass were notoriously resistant to change, and George understood that challenging the status quo could very well lead to career suicide. He recalled the disdain with which previous ideas had been dismissed. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," one officer had scoffed at a young engineer's proposal months earlier. Despite the odds stacked against him, George felt an insatiable drive to forge ahead. He had seen too many brave lives lost to allow fear to dictate his actions. He believed in the power of innovation, the same power that had transformed the automotive industry, and felt compelled to channel that spirit into the creation of a weapon that could turn the tide of war. What he didn't know was that this idea would change the war. The stakes were high, the path uncertain, but George was ready to take a leap of faith. The struggle for innovation would soon begin, but first he had to convince others that his vision was worth pursuing. In an era defined by the clash of steel and courage, one young engineer stood at the brink of redefining how a nation fought. The clock was ticking, and the world awaited a breakthrough that could alter the course of history. March 17, 1943. Ford Motor Company plant, Detroit. The relentless rhythm of machines drowns out the rising anxiety among the workforce. Amidst the chaos, George, a 30-year-old engineer with tousled hair and ink-stained fingers, painstakingly analyzes blueprints spread across his cluttered desk. Each line represents not just a design, but a call to arms. Every detail is a potential lifeline for soldiers on distant fronts. George is not just any engineer. He embodies the embodiment of American ingenuity. Raised in a humble household in Michigan, he learned to tinker with gadgets as a boy, often sitting beside his father, a mechanic who taught him that necessity drives invention. "You can always make it work, son," his father would say, igniting a spark of innovation that never dulled. As he scans the blueprints, his brow furrows. The military needs a reliable, affordable submachine gun to replace the cumbersome weapons currently in use. A weapon that can fire continuously, be easily manufactured, and withstand the rigors of combat. Yet all the efforts seem futile. The prevailing designs are either too costly or too complex, leaving the soldiers exposed to gunfire without adequate protection. "What we need," George mutters to himself, "is something simple, something that can be made fast." His voice trails off, swallowed by the buzzing of machinery. He leans back in his chair, staring at the blueprint of a German model, a sleek masterpiece of engineering, yet impractically expensive. $3,000, he whispers, for a weapon that might not even be reliable in the field. It's absurd. The shadows in the room lengthen as the clock ticks toward evening. George's mind races. He recalls the old-fashioned grease gun his father used to maintain their car, a tool simple in design yet effective in function. What if I could design something like that, a gun that's as straightforward as a grease gun? The thought ignites a flicker of hope, mingled with trepidation. But in the back of his mind, doubt crawls in. The military hierarchy will never accept such an unconventional idea. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." He can almost hear the voices of his superiors echoing in his head. But a fire has ignited within him, and he knows he must act. The next day, George gathers his sketches and heads to the office of his immediate superior, an imposing figure named Captain McCabe. The captain is a man of tradition, his walls adorned with military plaques and photographs of past glories. As George enters, he feels the weight of expectation hanging in the air. "Captain, I have an idea," he states, his voice quivering slightly. The captain looks up, eyebrow raised, skepticism etched in his features. "Another one of your wild concepts, George?" McCabe asks, leaning back in his chair. "We need proven designs, not juvenile fantasies." George swallows hard. "This gun, it's not like the others. It could be made for $30. McCabe scoffs, crossing his arms. $30, and you think that will be effective in combat? We're at war, son. Not playing games. Sir, what if— Enough! McCabe interrupts, his voice booming. "If you want to waste time on fantasies, do it on your own time. We need results." Defeated, George retreats to his desk, feeling the weight of the world upon his shoulders. The realization hits him hard. If he were to wait for permission, countless lives could be lost. He cannot let fear stifle his ideas. Days turn into weeks as George wrestles with his thoughts. He sketches relentlessly, driven by a sense of purpose. In the silence of the office after hours, he discovers a rhythm in his work, pouring every ounce of determination into creating designs for what he calls the grease gun. The breakthrough comes unexpectedly. While repairing a malfunctioning factory machine, a sudden flash of inspiration strikes him. The simplicity of the machine's mechanics mirrors what he envisions for his gun. It must be lightweight, easy to assemble, and dependable, qualities that will save lives. With renewed vigor, George sets out to construct a prototype in secret. He sneaks spare parts from the factory, combining metal tubing, springs, and whatever else he can salvage. As he works late into the night, the glow of a single bulb illuminates his face, revealing a mix of determination and anxiety. Finally, one fateful evening, the grease gun stands before him. A crude yet functional design that embodies his father's spirit of ingenuity. "It's not pretty," he mutters, running his fingers over the metal. "But it could save lives." George's heart races as he prepares for the first test. He knows he must find someone to help him, someone who understands the stakes. He approaches a fellow engineer, Ruth, a sharp mind with a passion for innovation that rivals his own. "Ruth, I need your help," he implores, urgency in his voice. "I've designed something that could change everything, but I can't do it alone." Ruth studies him for a moment, then nods. "Let's see what you've got." Together, they work tirelessly, refining the design, conducting tests in the shadowy corners of the factory. The initial attempts are fraught with failures, a misfire here, a jam there, but each setback fuels their resolve. The turning point arrives during a particularly tense evening. George, holding his breath, pulls the trigger for the first test. A single shot rings out, followed by the satisfying sound of a distinct, steady rhythm. Ruth's eyes widen in disbelief, a smile breaking across her face. "It works! It actually works!" The exhilaration surges through George. "But we can't stop here," he breathes, the adrenaline coursing through him. "We need to improve its accuracy and reliability." As they dive deeper into their project, George begins to envision the impact of their creation. Soldiers equipped with the grease gun could move swiftly, providing cover for their comrades without the heavy burden of costly weapons. Each test strengthens his conviction, igniting a fire within him that refuses to be extinguished. But lurking in the back of his mind is the looming threat of discovery. If higher-ups learn of his clandestine efforts, the consequences could be dire. Yet, the thought of soldiers struggling on the battlefield drives him forward. The stakes couldn't be higher. Weeks later, with a functional prototype finally in hand, George finds himself standing before McCabe once more, this time with Ruth by his side. "Captain, we've made something extraordinary," George declares, his voice steady. McCabe narrows his eyes, skepticism hanging in the air. "What is it this time?" "Let us show you," George insists, determination etched on his face. As the captain watches the demonstration, the sound of the grease gun firing pierces the silence. A stunned silence envelops the room as the realization dawns on McCabe. You actually did it," he murmurs, disbelief mingling with intrigue. What he didn't know was that this idea would change the war, George thinks, a glimmer of hope igniting within him. If stories like this fascinate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and comment below. March 25, 1943. A secluded basement workshop at the Ford Motor Company plant, Detroit. The smell of grease mingles with the sharp tang of metal shavings. George stands in front of a makeshift workbench, heart pounding. Today, he's ready to test the prototype of his revolutionary submachine gun design, the grease gun. Surrounded by a small group of trusted colleagues, the atmosphere is electric with anticipation. "Are you sure about this?" whispers Jack, a fellow engineer, his brow furrowed with concern. "If anyone finds out..." George cuts him off with a determined gaze. "We can't wait for approval. The men in the field need this now." Jack nods, albeit reluctantly, while the others share nervous glances. They know the risks of defying military protocols, but the urgency of the war weighs heavily on them. The prototype, a rough assembly of metal and plastic, looks nothing like the ornate German engineering marvels currently dominating the battlefield. Yet, George believes in its simplicity and effectiveness. With one deep breath, he flips the switch. A low hum fills the room, and they watch as the gun whirs to life. At first, it sputters and jams. George's heart sinks. "Damn it," he mutters, hands trembling as he quickly disassembles the mechanism for the third time. "Focus, George," he hears his inner voice urging him on. "You can fix this." With a flick of his wrist, he adjusts the spring tension and slides everything back into place. "Let's try again," he says, steeling his resolve. This time, as he fires off a burst, the gun spits bullets with surprising precision. A ripple of excitement flows through the workshop. "It works!" someone cries, and cheers erupt around him. But George is not finished yet. "We need to document this," he says, scrambling for a notebook. His colleagues gather around, scribbling notes and measurements as the adrenaline pushes them forward. Hours pass, and as the sun begins to set, a sense of accomplishment washes over the group. They've managed to create a functional weapon in secrecy, a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos of war. "Let's take it to the range," George suggests, a spark igniting in his eyes. The range, an abandoned lot behind the plant, will be the proving grounds for their creation, a test of whether this makeshift invention can withstand the rigorous demands of combat. The group hurriedly transports the prototype, hearts racing as they carry the weight of their aspirations on their shoulders. The Detroit skyline looms behind them, a stark contrast to the desolate range ahead. Under the dim glow of a street lamp, they set up a series of targets, old tires and wooden planks. George positions himself at a safe distance, gripping the grease gun tightly. The moment stretches, filled with a mix of fear and excitement. "Okay, here goes nothing," he mutters, pulling the trigger. The gun roars to life, spitting bullets in rapid succession, each shot echoing into the night. The targets crumble under the onslaught, and the group erupts into cheers. "Look at that accuracy!" Jack yells, excitement flooding his voice. "It's incredible." George's heart swells with pride. "We're just getting started," he replies, his eyes glinting with determination. They repeat the test, refining the design with each round until the grease gun performs flawlessly. But the celebration is short-lived. As they pack up, a shadow looms over them. "What in the hell is going on here?" a booming voice demands. It's Colonel Thompson, a stern figure known for his strict adherence to military protocol. The group freezes, fear gripping their hearts. "Sir, we were just testing a new design," George stammers, clutching the grease gun protectively. Colonel Thompson steps closer, inspecting the prototype with a critical eye. "You took this upon yourselves? Without authorization?" George takes a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage. "Yes, sir, but it works. It could save lives. The soldiers need a weapon they can rely on. This is—" "Enough!" Thompson interrupts, his voice like thunder. "You're playing with fire, engineer. I could have you arrested for this." The tension hangs thick in the air, choking the excitement from the moment. George feels a swell of panic but stands tall, meeting the colonel's gaze. "With all due respect, sir, we tested it to help our boys on the front lines. It's not just a weapon, it's a lifeline." Colonel Thompson raises an eyebrow, his expression softening just a fraction. "And you think this grease gun can outmatch the Germans' best?" "We believe it can," George insists, heart racing. "It's cheaper, easier to manufacture, and simple enough for any soldier to use. We can produce them in mass quantities." The colonel's expression shifts, contemplating the potential. "You have data?" "Not yet, but we can fix that," George replies quickly, adrenaline coursing through him. "Just let us take it to an official range. We'll demonstrate its capabilities." After a long moment, Thompson sighs, the weight of the world resting on his shoulders. "Fine. But if you fail to impress, it's your head on the line." As they prepare for the official demonstration, George's mind races. They've defied the odds, sparked a revolution, but the real test lies ahead. If you're hooked on this story, hit that subscribe button. As the crew sets up for the demonstration, George's thoughts churn. He knows the stakes are high. The fate of countless soldiers could depend on the outcome. What they've built in secrecy could change the tide of war, The weight of that responsibility presses on him, a heavy mantle he both embraces and fears. But as the sun rises over Detroit, casting golden light across the range, George feels a flicker of hope. They have a chance to prove that innovation can emerge from desperation, that with courage, ordinary people can achieve the extraordinary. March 20th, 1943, Pentagon, Washington, D.C. The air hangs heavy with skepticism. A long table stretches across the dimly lit conference room, where high-ranking military officials exchange wary glances. The walls, lined with maps and battle strategies, amplify the tension. At the center of the table sits General Morrow, a veteran commander with a reputation for dismissing unconventional ideas. His eyes narrow as he surveys the assembled team. "Gentlemen," he begins, his voice gruff, "we're here to discuss the future of our infantry. We need reliable weapons, not pipe dreams." He gestures sharply at a large, imposing model of the German MG-42 machine gun, a feat of engineering that has earned both admiration and dread. Across the room, George stands, a simple engineer flanked by a few aides. His heart pounds in his chest, but he forces his voice to steady. "Sir, I believe we might have an alternative that could change the course of this conflict." His words hang in the air like a dare. The room erupts in murmurs. Colonel Harris, a hardened officer with skepticism etched on his face, scoffs. "And what makes you think your design made from scrap metal can rival the MG-42? That's the pinnacle of German engineering." George takes a breath, drawing on the courage he's cultivated throughout his years of tinkering. "It's not just about the materials, sir. It's about adaptability, manufacturability, and speed." He gestures to a stack of blueprints and a small, crude model of the submachine gun, the M3 grease gun. "We can produce this for under $30 and get it to our troops in time." The laughter that erupts is sharp and cutting. "A $30 gun?" Colonel Harris scoffs again. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." "Gentlemen," General Morrow interjects, his tone cutting through the derision, "let's not jump to conclusions. Mr. George, proceed." George seizes the opportunity. His voice takes on a fervent edge, fueled by a mix of desperation and hope. "This design is simple yet effective. It requires minimal training, can be produced rapidly, and is lightweight. We could have thousands in the field within weeks." General Morrow leans forward, intrigued despite himself. "Show us what you can do, George. I want a live demonstration. If this grease gun works as you say, we could have a game changer on our hands." The tension in the room crackles as George nods, swallowing his apprehension. "I can secure the materials and get a prototype ready for testing in a week, sir." "Make it happen," Morrow replies, determination creeping into his voice. "Now you have a chance, but it's up to you to prove it." As the meeting wraps, George slips out of the Pentagon, his mind racing with possibilities. He knows the challenges ahead are monumental. The clock is ticking, and he has 1 week to transform his vision into reality. March 27th, 1943. Ford Plant, Detroit. The atmosphere is electric with urgency. Men and women move in a synchronized dance, assembling parts, welding metal, and testing components. George stands at the center, a conductor of this industrial symphony, his blueprints flying off the table as he directs the production of the prototype. "Faster! We need to be ready!" he shouts, adrenaline surging through him. The hum of machinery is a backdrop to his inspired frenzy, sweat beading on his forehead. The sun sets, casting an orange glow through the factory windows, illuminating the determined faces of his team. Each worker is not just part of a production line, they are part of something greater. George can feel their hopes intertwining with his own, pushing him to deliver. Finally, the day arrives. March 31st, 1943, a hidden test site outside of Washington, DC George stands beside General Morrow and a group of scrutinizing military officials. The atmosphere is charged with anticipation. A slender figure in the distance, the grease gun, gleams under the bright sun, a testament to American innovation. "Let's see if this thing actually works," Colonel Harris mutters, arms crossed defiantly. "Ready when you are, sir," George replies, his voice steady, though his heart races. With a nod from Morrow, the test begins. A soldier takes position, gripping the grease gun tightly. The first shots echo across the field and the sound is deafening. The gun fires smoothly, spitting bullets with precision. George's breath hitches as he watches the soldier adjust and move, firing at targets set up at various distances. "Impressive," Morrow declares, a hint of surprise in his tone. "Keep firing." The soldier continues, and the burst of fire is a symphony of chaos and control. George's hands tremble with excitement. "We can reduce losses by 85% with this weapon," he shouts over the noise. As the last round echoes, a silence falls over the group. Colonel Harris's expression shifts from skepticism to astonishment. I didn't expect that," he admits, shaking his head. "Not bad for a $30 gun," George quips, unable to suppress a proud grin. General Morrow approaches him, a glint of respect in his eyes. "You've done well, George. But this is just the beginning. We need to present this to the higher-ups. We're going to push for immediate production." George nods, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and determination. "I'll make sure we're ready." As they walk back to the cars, George can feel the weight of possibility settling on his shoulders. The tide is turning, and for the first time, he sees the glimmer of hope amid the storm of war. With newfound resolve, he whispers to himself, "We can change the course of history." The thought fuels his every step, echoing in his mind as they drive back to the Pentagon, where the next battle awaits. April 22nd, 1943. Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. The air is thick with tension, a palpable mixture of hope and skepticism. Military brass in tailored uniforms fill the conference room, glancing at the clock as if time itself were part of the deliberation. They know that the future of American tactics hinges on this moment, yet doubt lingers as heavily as the cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. At the head of the table stands General Arnold, his eyes sharp and piercing. "We've gathered here today to discuss the potential deployment of the M3 grease gun," he says, his voice steady. He glances at George, seated at the edge of the room, a figure who seems almost out of place amidst the imposing officers. "But let's be clear. This is an unconventional weapon. It's untested in the field." "Sir, if I may," George interjects, his voice faltering but determined. He rises, clutching a folder filled with data. "The M3 is cost-effective, easily manufactured, and can be produced in greater numbers than any comparable weapon." He locks eyes with the general, drawing courage from the challenge. "We can't afford another failure. We need a solution now." The murmurs grow louder as skepticism rises. Colonel Henderson leans forward, his brow furrowed with doubt. "George, I respect your enthusiasm, but we're deploying resources into something that's frankly a gamble. You're asking us to trust a weapon that costs a fraction of our current armaments. What evidence do you have that it will perform?" George exhales sharply, recalling the tests. The hours spent in the makeshift lab where he had poured his heart into every prototype. "The trials we conducted showed it can withstand harsh conditions. In the worst-case scenarios, it outperformed our expectations." He gestures to the data he compiled, a mixture of test results, comparisons with the Thompson submachine gun, and insights from soldiers who had tested prototypes in the field. General Arnold nods, but the room remains divided. "We need clear metrics, George. Losses reduced by what percentage? We can't risk lives on just your word." 85%, George states firmly, and a heavy silence falls over the room. 85% reduction in failure rates compared to the Thompson, with the same firepower and more reliability under fire. His voice gains strength, fueled by the passion of his conviction. We can make history here, gentlemen. The grease gun might just be the answer we've been searching for. The skepticism is palpable, yet curiosity ripples through the ranks. General Arnold maintains his composure, but glances at his colleagues, gauging their reactions. We can't just take this to the field without a proper test. I propose a live fire exercise, George suggests, sensing a glimmer of hope. Let's pit it against the Thompson in a controlled environment. We'll bring in soldiers familiar with both weapons and measure performance in real time. If it fails, I'll accept responsibility. But if it succeeds... His voice trails off, leaving the promise hanging in the air. Colonel Henderson crosses his arms, skepticism still etched on his face. You're putting your career on the line, George. Many have gambled and lost before you. George meets his gaze unwaveringly. I'm willing to take that risk. We owe it to the soldiers on the front lines. Whispers circulate amongst the officers, a mix of trepidation and intrigue. Finally, General Arnold speaks, leaning forward slightly. Very well. We'll conduct a live fire exercise next week. But know this, George, if this fails, it could be the end of your career. Understood, sir, George replies, a sense of resolve washing over him. As the meeting adjourns, the air feels charged with possibility. He steps outside, the weight of the world resting on his shoulders. May 1st, 1943, Field Test Range, Fort Belvoir, Virginia. A sense of anticipation electrifies the atmosphere as soldiers gather around the makeshift range. In the distance, the sun rises cautiously, casting golden rays over the barren landscape. George stands alongside General Arnold and Colonel Henderson, heart racing as the moment approaches. The soldiers will demonstrate both weapons, Arnold explains, gesturing toward a group of soldiers preparing to handle the Thompson submachine gun and the M3 grease gun. We'll observe and record every detail. As the first shots ring out, George's stomach twists with anxiety. The Thompson booms, its bark echoing through the trees, while the grease gun produces a more subdued but relentless staccato. Soldiers test their aim, firing at a series of targets designed to replicate combat conditions. The Thompson quickly shows its prowess, but as the grease gun's turn comes, George watches with bated breath. Each shot lands true, and the soldiers' faces reflect a growing confidence. "It's easy to handle, sir," one private shouts, his smile wide as he reloads. The data is collected meticulously. Each moment, a building block of validation. Colonel Henderson scribbles notes, brow furrowed with concentration, the skepticism slowly fading from his demeanor. As the test concludes, George can hardly breathe, his heart pounding. Arnold calls the soldiers together, his voice booming. "Thank you for your service today. We'll review the results and proceed accordingly." George steps away, needing a moment to collect himself. He feels the gravity of the moment, the weight of change hanging in the air. "Hey, George." A soldier approaches, grinning. "That thing's a beast. It's like holding magic." With a mix of relief and pride, George smiles back. "Thank you. We're just getting started." The report comes in days later, laid out on General Arnold's desk. 85%, he announces, eyes widening as he reviews the data. Losses reduced by 85%. The M3 grease gun performed better than we anticipated. Colonel Henderson's face betrays disbelief, but also respect. "I'll admit, I was wrong. You've just changed the game, George." "Let's see how it performs in actual combat," Arnold counters, his voice steady. "But you've earned my trust. We'll authorize its deployment." George's heart swells with triumph, but he knows the fight is not over. He looks to the future, a future where innovation has a place in the face of war. May 15th, 1943. The M3 grease gun is rolled out to the field, soldiers clutching the weapon with newfound trust. As they take their positions, George watches from afar, a sense of pride swelling within him. In the chaos of battle, with danger looming and lives on the line, the grease gun's reliability shines through. Soldiers in the trenches feel its power, experience a new sense of hope against overwhelming odds. As George reflects on his journey, he realizes it was never about the weapon itself, but the lives it would save. Innovation doesn't merely require credentials. It demands courage, the willingness to stand against doubt and fight for what is right. April 25th, 1945. The air hangs heavy over Europe as World War II reaches its apex. The remnants of cities lay in ruins, and the scars of battle are etched deep into the landscape. In the United States, however, a new dawn is beginning. The grease gun, a simple yet effective weapon designed by George and his team, has gained recognition for changing the tide of several key confrontations on the front lines. The weapon's ingenious simplicity, crafted from stamped metal and a handful of components, has proven time and again to be more reliable than its expensive counterparts. Back home in Detroit, George sits at his kitchen table, the sunlight filtering through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It's a serene contrast to the chaos unfolding across the ocean. Though George is aware of the accolades pouring in for the grease gun, he remains modest. He sips his coffee, the warmth grounding him in a reality far removed from the horrors of war. He reflects on the journey. I never intended for this to happen, he thinks. But if my work can save lives, then it's worth every sleepless night. The figures tell a powerful story. The grease gun's production costs were a mere $30, while the German MP-40, a highly engineered masterpiece, priced at $3,000 per unit, fell short in reliability and ease of use during combat. The American forces, equipped with the grease gun, reduced casualties by a staggering 85% in close-quarters battles. The disparity in cost and effectiveness is a testament to the fact that innovation does not always require grand designs or extensive funding. Sometimes, it is born from necessity and a willingness to think outside the box. As the war draws to a close, George watches newsreels featuring soldiers using the grease gun in urban warfare. The images flicker across the screen, showcasing the soldiers' bravery, their unity, and the sense of camaraderie forged in the crucible of conflict. Each firing of the weapon becomes a testament to the courage of the young men who wield it. George's heart swells with pride and a tinge of sorrow. He understands the weight of those lives. He's aware of the sacrifices that have been made, the friends and families forever altered by the war. In the aftermath of the war, George is invited to speak at various military events, where generals and civilians alike seek to acknowledge the man behind the innovative weapon that helped save countless lives. However, true to his character, George often sidesteps the spotlight. It wasn't just me, he insists. It was teamwork, a community effort. Every engineer, every worker at Ford contributed. His humility touches the hearts of many, but it also becomes a source of frustration for some who want to elevate him to a status he does not seek. The legacy of the grease gun transcends the war. It symbolizes resilience, adaptability, and the spirit of American ingenuity, qualities that resonate deeply in a nation recovering from the ravages of conflict. The design's impact is felt not just in military circles but in classrooms and workshops, inspiring a new generation of engineers to innovate and create. Years later, in 1965, George receives a letter from a former soldier. "Dear Mr. Smith," it begins, "I wanted to thank you. That simple weapon saved my life in the streets of Berlin. I was pinned down, and when I finally got a chance to fire back, it worked. The grease gun was my lifeline. Tears well in George's eyes as he reads the heartfelt gratitude. It is moments like this that remind him of the true purpose of his work, far beyond any accolades or recognition. The war may have ended, but George's journey continues, a relentless pursuit of innovation, driven by the same spirit that pushed him to create the grease gun. He dedicates himself to mentoring young engineers, sharing his experiences, and encouraging them to pursue ideas that may initially seem impossible. Innovation doesn't need credentials. It needs courage, he tells them, instilling in them the belief that they too can change the world, one idea at a time. As George reflects on his legacy, he recognizes the importance of not just what he created, but how it has inspired others to question, to innovate, and to believe in their potential. His modesty never fades. He often thinks back to his childhood, tinkering away at his father's workbench, finding joy in creation. Time marches on, and George eventually fades from public consciousness, yet his contributions live on. Histories are written, and the grease gun is enshrined as a prime example of how necessity can birth innovation. In quiet corners of workshops and garages, young inventors still whisper his name, wondering how they too might leave their mark on history. And in those moments, they realize that every time they dare to dream, every time they push the boundaries of what is possible, they carry forward the legacy of George Smith, a legacy forged in the crucible of war, but rooted in the hope for a more innovative future. As the credits roll, the screen fades to black, echoing with the truth that, what impossible ideas do you think could change the world? Comment below and join the conversation.